This is one of the most disturbing true crime stories you will ever hear. A young mother disappears without a trace. Her warnings are ignored, and years later, the two children she left behind are brutally killed, not by a stranger, but by the person meant to protect them. This is the story of Susan Powell, a disappearance that was never solved, a family that collapsed from the inside, and a tragedy that could have been prevented. It was December 6, 2009, a cold Sunday night in West Valley City, Utah. Susan called her parents, talked briefly about work, about her sons, about how busy life had been. Nothing sounded urgent. Nothing hinted that within hours she would disappear forever, leaving behind two young boys, a husband whose story never quite made sense, and a mystery that would haunt an entire nation. Susan Cox Powell was the kind of person people described as dependable, gentle, and quietly strong. She worked hard, loved her children deeply, and tried, desperately, to hold together a marriage that had been unraveling for years. She lived with her husband, Joshua Powell, and their two sons, Charlie and Braden, in a modest suburban home. On the outside, it looked ordinary. On the inside, it was strained, tense, and emotionally suffocating. Joshua Powell was not an easy man to live with. Socially awkward, deeply controlling, and chronically resentful, he viewed himself as misunderstood by the world. He kept detailed journals, thousands of pages, where he recorded grievances, suspicions, and his belief that others were conspiring against him. Susan, in contrast, kept her own private journals. In them, she wrote something chilling. "If anything happens to me, Josh did it." That sentence would later echo through every investigation room, every courtroom, and every documentary that followed. The night Susan vanished, Joshua claimed something strange had happened. He told police that around midnight, he suddenly decided to take the boys on an impromptu camping trip in the middle of winter. Temperatures were below freezing. Snow covered the ground. It was not the kind of night anyone would choose for a spontaneous outdoor adventure, especially with two young children. According to Joshua, Susan stayed home because she wasn't feeling well. By morning, Susan was gone. Her purse was still inside the house, her keys, her coat. There were no signs of a struggle, but there were also no signs that she had left willingly. Friends immediately sensed something was wrong. Susan never went anywhere without telling someone, especially not without arranging care for her kids. Police quickly focused on Joshua, not because of evidence of violence, but because of his behavior. He was calm, detached, more concerned with legal wording than with finding his missing wife. He refused to cooperate fully. He lawyered up almost immediately. And then there was the camping trip. Joshua said he drove the boys deep into the Utah desert late at night, stopping at several locations. Investigators later confirmed the trip, but what they couldn't confirm was what happened before it, or during it, or what Joshua may have disposed of along the way. As detectives searched the Powell home, unsettling details emerged. Susan's cell phone was missing. Her journals hinted at fear. Co-workers reported that Susan had recently been talking about leaving Joshua. She had even begun documenting his behavior, quietly preparing for a future she feared she might never reach. The investigation expanded rapidly, drawing national attention. Search teams scoured deserts, mines, and abandoned sites across Utah. Every lead led back to the same place, Joshua Powell. But the case wasn't just about Joshua, because looming in the background was another deeply disturbing figure, Joshua's father, Steven Powell. Steven Powell was obsessed with Susan, not metaphorically, literally. He had written songs about her, taken secret photographs of her, recorded her voice without her knowledge. He believed she loved him and that Joshua was standing in the way of their destined relationship. Susan, meanwhile, had expressed fear of Steven as well, describing him as inappropriate and unsettling. Steven lived nearby. He had access. He had motive, at least psychologically. And he inserted himself into the narrative constantly, blaming Susan, blaming authorities, blaming everyone but his son. Investigators had to consider a terrifying possibility. Was this a family conspiracy? Or a family so dysfunctional it collapsed inward? Despite months of searching, Susan Powell's body was never found. And without a body, prosecutors faced a devastating limitation. They strongly believed Joshua had killed Susan, but belief was not enough. There was no physical evidence tying him to a crime scene. No witnesses, no remains. Joshua was never charged. Instead, he moved back to Washington State with his sons, under court supervision. Susan's parents fought desperately for custody, arguing that the boys were at risk. Psychologists warned that Joshua exhibited narcissistic and antisocial traits. Social workers raised alarms, but the system moved slowly. Joshua, meanwhile, grew more isolated, more paranoid, more angry. He blamed Susan's family for everything that had gone wrong. He blamed the police. He blamed the media. He believed the world had stolen his children, his reputation, his future. And beneath it all was a truth investigators feared, but could not yet prove. Susan Powell had not simply vanished. She had been erased. And the people who knew the most about what happened to her were still alive, still free, and still capable of doing something far worse. The disappearance of Susan Powell did not bring closure. It opened a wound that only grew deeper with time. As weeks turned into months, the questions shifted from "Where is Susan?" to something far more unsettling. How dangerous is the family she left behind? Joshua Powell returned to Washington State with his two sons, Charlie and Braden, settling into his father Steven's home. On paper, it looked temporary, a man grieving, children needing stability. In reality, it placed two young boys inside an environment investigators already considered deeply unstable. Joshua's behavior continued to disturb everyone around him. He rarely spoke about Susan unless forced. When he did, his words sounded rehearsed, emotionally hollow. He showed no urgency to find her, no grief consistent with a husband whose wife had vanished without explanation. Instead, he focused on defending himself, legally, philosophically, obsessively. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, watched in horror as the system failed to act. They had warned authorities long before Susan disappeared that Joshua was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. After she vanished, they pleaded for custody of their grandsons, believing the boys were in danger. Professionals agreed. Court-appointed psychologists evaluated Joshua and raised serious red flags. They described him as narcissistic, lacking empathy, and prone to rigid thinking. One evaluator warned that Joshua's emotional detachment from reality made him unpredictable, especially under stress. But once again, there was a problem no one could solve. Joshua had not been charged with a crime. Without physical evidence or Susan's body, the law treated him as an innocent man. And innocent men, even deeply suspicious ones, retain rights, especially to their children. Meanwhile, Steven Powell's role in the case grew darker by the day. Steven was no longer just the odd, inappropriate father-in-law. He became a central figure of concern. Investigators uncovered thousands of images on his computer, many of them secret photographs of Susan. There were recordings of her voice, songs he had written about her, journal entries describing his belief that Susan loved him and was being held captive by Joshua. Susan had been afraid of Steven. She had written about him in her journals. She had asked Joshua to set boundaries. Instead, Joshua dismissed her concerns, sometimes mocking them. The psychology of the Powell family began to take shape. Steven was obsessive, delusional, and sexually fixated. Joshua was controlling, resentful, and emotionally detached. Together, they created an environment where Susan was isolated, monitored, and psychologically trapped. In 2010, police arrested Steven Powell, not for Susan's disappearance, but for voyeurism and possession of child pornography. The charges shocked the public, but validated long-held fears. Steven was convicted and sentenced to prison, yet even behind bars, he continued to proclaim his innocence, and Joshua's. Steven insisted Susan had run away. He blamed Chuck Cox. He blamed the police. He blamed the media. Anyone but the people closest to her. Joshua, meanwhile, became increasingly unstable. He lost his job. Friends distanced themselves. The media scrutiny intensified. His identity shrank until it revolved around a single belief that he was being persecuted and that his sons were the only things left that belonged to him. Court-supervised visitations were arranged. Social workers monitored Joshua's interactions with Charlie and Braden. They noticed troubling patterns. He spoke to them about the case. He told them people were trying to steal them away. He framed himself as the victim in a cruel world. The boys were young, but not unaware. Charlie, the older of the two, began saying things that made adults uneasy. He talked about mommy being gone. He mentioned things his father said they shouldn't repeat. At one point, he told a social worker that his mom went camping and didn't come back. Every warning sign was there, but bureaucracy moves slowly. Courts require procedures, evidence, thresholds, and Joshua learned how to operate just below them. By 2011, the custody battle intensified. Susan's parents pushed harder, armed with expert evaluations and growing public pressure. The courts began to lean toward limiting Joshua's access to the boys. Joshua felt cornered. Psychologically, this is where the story turns fatal. When individuals with narcissistic and antisocial traits lose control, they often experience what experts call narcissistic collapse. The world no longer mirrors their self-image. Authority challenges them. Their sense of ownership over people, over narratives, fractures. Joshua believed his children were not independent human beings. They were extensions of himself, proof that he still mattered, that he still had power, and power, once threatened, can become lethal. In early 2012, Joshua was informed that his parental rights might be permanently terminated, supervised visits could be suspended, his sons might be placed with Susan's parents, people Joshua deeply resented. To Joshua, this was not a legal matter, it was annihilation. On February 5, 2012, a social worker arrived at Joshua's rented home in Washington State to supervise a routine visitation. Charlie and Braden ran inside, excited to see their father. Joshua followed, but he did something different this time. He slammed the door shut, he locked it. Within seconds, neighbors heard shouting, then an explosion. Joshua Powell had attacked his sons with a hatchet. He poured gasoline throughout the house. He set it on fire. By the time emergency responders forced their way inside, it was too late. Joshua was dead, Charlie was dead, Braden was dead. The fire consumed the home, and with it, any remaining illusion that this tragedy could have ended differently. The nation reeled. How had this been allowed to happen? Investigations followed, policy reviews, public outrage. The system admitted what Susan's parents had been saying all along. The warning signs were there. They had simply not been acted upon in time. Susan Powell's body was never found. Joshua took the truth with him to the grave, but the psychological picture was now painfully clear. This was not a sudden act of madness. It was the final chapter of a long documented collapse, enabled by denial, delay, and disbelief. And as the smoke cleared, one haunting truth remained. Susan had tried to warn everyone, and no one listened soon enough. After the fire was extinguished and the bodies were removed, silence settled over what remained of the Powell case. The man believed to be responsible for Susan's disappearance, and now the confirmed killer of 2 innocent children, was gone. Any hope of a confession, a map, a final truth had vanished with him. But investigators were not finished. With Joshua Powell dead, law enforcement finally had the freedom to reconstruct the case without worrying about protecting his legal rights. Every journal, every computer file, every financial record was examined again. This time not to build a prosecution, but to uncover the truth Susan never lived to tell. Joshua's journals revealed a mind obsessed with control. He wrote about Susan not as a partner, but as a possession, something he feared losing. He described resentment toward her independence, anger at her friendships, and paranoia that she was plotting against him. He rarely spoke of love. When he did, it was framed as entitlement. Investigators noted something chilling. Joshua often wrote hypotheticals about death, about ending suffering, about disappearing without consequences. None of it was explicit. All of it was deeply disturbing. Then there were the financial records. In the days leading up to Susan's disappearance, Joshua made unexplained withdrawals. He canceled her life insurance shortly before she vanished. He researched desert locations, mining sites, and remote areas late at night. Individually, each action could be explained. Together, they painted a picture of planning. Search teams returned to Utah's western deserts, places Joshua had driven during that mysterious camping trip. They searched abandoned mine shafts, salt flats, and remote canyons. Cadaver dogs reacted in some areas. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies, but Susan Powell was never found. The leading theory became grimly consistent. Susan was killed inside her home, likely while her son slept. Joshua then disposed of her body during the overnight drive, possibly in a mine or remote desert location that would never give her back. And the boys? Investigators believe Joshua spared them initially, not out of mercy, but strategy. They were leverage. They protected him from immediate arrest. They anchored his narrative as a grieving husband and devoted father, until they no longer served that purpose. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, were left to carry the weight of every unanswered question. They had lost their daughter, then their grandsons, and then any legal resolution that might have brought peace. But they refused to let Susan be forgotten. They spoke publicly. They testified before lawmakers. They pushed for changes to how courts evaluate risk in custody cases involving suspected domestic violence. Their advocacy led to what became known as Susan's Law, legislation requiring police departments to take missing adult cases more seriously when there is evidence of domestic abuse. It also reshaped how child welfare agencies assess parental danger, emphasizing behavioral patterns over criminal convictions alone. The system had failed Susan, but it would not fail in the same way again, at least not without accountability. Meanwhile, the psychological analysis of the Powell family became a case study in criminology and social work programs across the country. Steven Powell's obsession with Susan was understood as erotomania, a delusional belief that another person is secretly in love with you. His fixation created an environment where Susan felt constantly watched, unsafe even within her own family. Joshua's pathology was different, but just as dangerous. Experts described him as exhibiting traits of narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. He lacked empathy. He externalized blame. He viewed people as tools, existing to validate or threaten his self-image. When Susan tried to leave, when the courts threatened his access to the boys, when his carefully constructed identity collapsed, he responded the only way he knew how, with absolute control, even if it meant destroying everything. Community members who once dismissed Susan's fears now replayed them in their minds. Co-workers remembered her quiet unease. Friends remembered how carefully she chose her words when talking about her marriage. And investigators returned again and again to one haunting truth. Susan Powell had predicted her own fate. "If I disappear," she wrote, "it was Josh." Those words became her testimony. The case officially remains unsolved. No remains, no confession, no courtroom verdict for Susan Powell. But in the court of evidence and psychology, the conclusion is painfully clear. Susan did not run away. She did not start a new life. She did not abandon her children. She was silenced. And her silence was followed by the deaths of the two people she loved most. Yet her story changed the law. It changed how danger is measured. It changed how warning signs are read. And that may be the only justice left. After Joshua Powell's death, investigators closed the case not with answers, but with conclusions. They stated publicly that they believed Joshua murdered Susan Powell and disposed of her body in a remote location, most likely during the overnight camping trip in December 2009. They believed he acted alone, and they believed that every step afterward, his lies, his detachment, his refusal to cooperate, was part of a deliberate effort to escape accountability. But belief is not proof, and that distinction haunted Susan's family. Chuck and Judy Cox spent years living between certainty and grief. They knew what happened to their daughter, even if the law could not say it out loud. They raised awareness. They testified. They turned private pain into public purpose. Yet the absence of Susan's remains meant there was no burial, no physical goodbye, no place to mourn. Grief without closure does not fade. It waits. The deaths of Charlie and Braden Powell reopened every wound. The boys were not collateral damage. They were victims of a system that prioritized legal technicalities over psychological reality. Every evaluation had warned that Joshua posed a risk. Every professional involved sensed danger, but no single agency felt empowered to act decisively. Responsibility fractured. Time ran out. In the years that followed, the case became a turning point in how child welfare agencies assess risk. Policymakers acknowledged that parental rights had been given precedence over child safety, even when warning signs were overwhelming. Supervised visitation protocols were rewritten. Emergency intervention thresholds were lowered. Social workers were trained to recognize patterns of coercive control and narcissistic collapse. Susan Powell's story became a lesson taught in classrooms, courtrooms, and training seminars, not as a mystery, but as a warning. The psychological dynamics at play were no longer abstract concepts. They had names, patterns, outcomes. Joshua Powell did not lose control in a moment of rage. He lost it gradually, predictably, and with mounting pressure. His worldview could not accommodate loss, shame, or powerlessness. When the legal system threatened to sever his connection to his sons, he did not see it as protection for them. He saw it as theft. And in that moment, his need for dominance eclipsed any remaining humanity. Steven Powell's role, too, became clearer with time. His obsession did not directly cause Susan's disappearance, but it contributed to the environment that isolated her. He normalized boundary violations. He reinforced Joshua's entitlement. He turned Susan into an object within a family structure that did not recognize her autonomy. Susan was surrounded by men who believed they knew her better than she knew herself, and she paid for it with her life. Yet her voice survived in journals and emails and warnings given to friends and coworkers. She documented fear when fear was dismissed. She anticipated disbelief and tried to prevent it. In doing so, she left behind something rare in true crime, a victim who told the truth before the crime could erase it. Today, the Powell house in West Valley City is just another address. The desert still stretches endlessly where Susan may rest. Life outwardly has moved on, but the case remains alive, whispered in discussions about domestic violence, cited in policy debates, remembered in the faces of two boys whose lives were stolen not by a stranger, but by the person entrusted to protect them. The story of Susan Powell is not about disappearance alone. It is about what happens when warning signs are documented but discounted, when fear is rationalized, when no evidence is mistaken for no danger. And it is about the irreversible cost of waiting. Susan Powell did not vanish without a trace. She vanished while people were watching. And that is what makes this case so haunting, because it was not inevitable. It was preventable. Some crimes don't end when the headlines fade. They stay with us because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths. Susan Powell tried to warn the people around her. She documented her fear, she anticipated disbelief, and still, she wasn't saved. This case isn't just about a disappearance. It's about control disguised as love, about warning signs explained away, about systems that waited for proof when the danger was already there. True crime isn't meant to be consumed as entertainment alone. It's meant to teach us how to recognize patterns, how to listen when someone says they're afraid, and how silence can be just as deadly as violence. If this story made you uncomfortable, it should, because discomfort is where awareness begins. And awareness is how tragedies like this are prevented. Thank you for watching Psychology of True Crime. If this story moved you, share it. If you believe these stories matter, kindly subscribe to our channel. And if someone you know feels trapped or unheard, listen, because sometimes being believed is what saves a life.